Welcome to Blue Talks.
I am so excited to be speaking here today at the University of Alberta in my hometown of Edmonton. Before we get started, I just want to invite all of us here to take a deep, beautiful, grounding breath with me, inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your mouth or your nose, whichever feels most comfortable for you. And as we sit in the gift of this moment, I want us to acknowledge that somewhere out there, somebody's taking their final breath. And it wasn't long ago, 10 years in fact, that I dreaded waking up in the morning. I dreaded opening up my eyes and taking the breath for the day. You see, I was 15 years deep into addiction at that point in my life. The pain was unbearable. But I stand here today, 10 years sober. It is truly a miracle. And it has been the journey of completely breaking down everything I thought I knew about myself and rebuilding who I truly was, rebuilding my worthiness and my truth. You see, sobriety isn't just about letting go of the alcohol, dropping the vice, whatever it might be, drugs, alcohol. It's about picking up the shattered pieces of our life. And for me, it was the summer of 2014, and my life shattered into pieces. I woke up in a jail cell after a night of hard partying, and it wasn't my first time, but it was my last in what I like to call my final rock bottom. You see, up until that point, I had been living a painful double life. On the outside, I looked happy, I looked successful, I had everything that you could imagine would create an incredible life, but on the inside, I was dying. I was in so much pain. That summer, after waking up in jail, in my final rock bottom, I took a look at my life and I took a step back and I thought to myself, I just can't keep living like this. I can't go on in this pain, in this darkness, in this suffering. I need to do something. Something has to change. And so I made the decision that day to give up alcohol and to enter into a healing and recovery journey, which I had no idea what that was going to look like. I just knew that I just couldn't keep on living the way that I had been living up until that point. And so I immersed myself into recovery and healing. I did everything, 12-step programs, support groups, all sorts of healing modalities, trauma healing modalities that I could get into. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, but I was just willing to try it all. I just knew that I just couldn't keep on living that life that I had been living up until that point. And I knew that where I was heading was actually death. And I didn't want to leave the pain that I had been carrying and transferring that to my loved ones to carry for the rest of their lives in my absence. So I made it to almost 2 months of sobriety in my first go around, and then I relapsed. And the shame and the disappointment that I felt was unbearable. I remember waking up just feeling utterly hopeless and just in desperation. And I thought, this isn't going to work for me. I'm never going to get better. And like life has proven to me time and time again, angels come into my life at just the right moments. And this day was no different. You see, somebody that I was in recovery with actually reached out to me that day, and they called me and they asked me, how are you doing today? And I just sobbed on the other side of the phone line. And I told her what had happened. I told her about my relapse, and I told her, should I even bother? This is never going to work for me. And she said something that changed the trajectory of my life up until this point. She said, a failure is only a failure when we don't learn from it. When we stumble and we fall, we have an opportunity to actually learn deep life lessons from our stumbles. So get yourself back up, dust yourself off, and learn what you need to learn from this, and don't let this setback define you. And that's what I did. I picked myself back up, I dusted myself off, and that was 10 years ago this month, October. it truly, with that mindset for me, what it did was that I reframed everything that I did moving forward. I looked at learning opportunities, failures as learning opportunities, and I was able to then actually gain some hard-earned wisdom within the last decade of my sober journey. And I'm going to share 3 of those lessons today with you all. So the first lesson that I learned was the truth about your circle. And this one was a bit of a painful one because you see, when I decided to get sober and I decided to drop the alcohol and the partying, I was really surprised that the majority of my social circle, which was huge, I was constantly at dinner parties, constantly going out on weekends and partying. My calendar was full. And suddenly when I removed the alcohol from my life and the partying, little by little, a lot of the people that surrounded me started to leave. A lot of them were surprised because alcohol is so acceptable, especially amongst young people. I was drinking just as heavy as a lot of my friends, and so they didn't see a problem in how they were living. And so they were confused as to why I was making this decision, because I was also very good at hiding all of the pain that I had been carrying up until that point. You see, I grew up in a violent alcoholic home and I experienced abuse in all forms. And not having any sort of tools, any sort of resources to be able to process all the pain, all the trauma that I had endured, when I found alcohol at age 15, it was an instant addiction. I was finally able to numb all of the pain that I had been carrying up until that point. I didn't have to deal with it. I didn't have to look at it. I buried it so deep that I just didn't even think about it because of the life that I was living. And so my friends just saw me as this happy party girl. And when I made that decision and I said, enough was enough, I'm no longer going to be partying with you all, a lot of people, I just received a lot of backlash. And it was actually quite painful because especially the people who I thought were going to be with me through my journey, little by little, they all started to distance themselves. And the painful truth and the reality of it was that they were actually very much attached to the unhealed version of me. The version of me that was the party girl, the version of me that had no boundaries, the version of me that gave my boundless energy freely without any sort of consequences, without any sort of restrictions. And when I started to create boundaries in my life and say, no, I'm not going to go out this weekend, those friends stopped calling more and more. The other thing I learned was that I started to notice how I felt when I was around certain groups of people from my past life. I started to notice how I would dim my light, how I would actually not share the things that I was excited about, the things that I was overcoming, the journey that I was on, the things that lit me up. It just wasn't safe for me to be this new, aligned, authentic self. And I would leave those group settings and I would feel so depleted and actually kind of depressed. And so I really had to take a hard look at the people that were around me and make the decision that I was also going to now start to distance myself from them, because it was not only hindering my progress, but they just weren't supportive of who I was becoming. And I had to be somebody that I didn't want to be around them. And so I made that decision to start having some boundaries and limitations around those people that I surrounded myself with. And the people who stay through your darkness are the ones who deserve to share your light, is what I learned. The second lesson that I learned was the power of boundaries. I know I've been talking a little bit about that so far because it is so crucial. And this is coming from somebody that had no boundaries. I didn't even know what that was, to be honest. Early in my sobriety, I lacked boundaries. I had no idea what they were. And so, like I said, I very much gave myself to everyone around me, just did everything and anything just to be accepted, just to be liked, just to belong and fit in. But when I started to realize, like I said, how I felt when I was leaving those situations, how I had to become the unhealed version of me in order to be accepted by some of these groups of people, actually wearing a mask, I just didn't want to do that anymore. And so I started to create boundaries around who I let into my energy field, who I allowed to speak into my life, who I allowed to surround me. And so I experienced backlash. And what I realized through that backlash was that people will only get upset with you when you create boundaries when they've been accustomed to taking advantage of you without your boundaries. One of the hardest boundaries that I've had to learn in my tenure of recovery and healing journey has been that of boundaries with certain family members and abusers, my abusers. For so long, I held on to the expectation and the hope that one day they would acknowledge what they had done to me, that they would validate my pain and my experience, and that they would even apologize, but at least acknowledge it. And when I noticed that they not only didn't acknowledge, and instead were actually creating more harm in my life, I made the very difficult decision of going no contact with certain family members. And that has been one of the most painful experiences that I'm still currently grieving through. And I said grieving because that led into the next layer of my healing and recovery journey, which is the grieving process. I had to learn to grieve so many things. I had to learn to grieve the relationships that didn't work out, the expectations that I had about some of these people, that they would one day see me and validate me. I had to grieve my old life, who I thought I was, the things I thought I liked. There was so much grief and mourning that was a part of my experience very much up until this point. And like with grief, it comes in waves. Sometimes it hits harder than other times. But when it does come, the cool thing about it now is that I actually have some incredible people and supportive people who actually do see me, who actually do validate my experiences and acknowledge who I am and am becoming. And I can turn to them during these painful processes and they get it. They just get it. Boundaries. There's misconception about boundaries. People think that boundaries are about shutting people out of your life or people, places, or things out of your life. But it's really the opposite. It's actually about protecting your peace and protecting your healing journey. So the third lesson, which is my personal favorite, is the empowerment in speaking your truth. For years, I hid my trauma and all of my pain. I didn't want to look at it. I honestly thought that if I had to dig up those old wounds and that pain and face it, I thought I was actually going to die. But what I experienced was that when I got in rooms around people who were safe to share with, people who could hold space for my pain, who could acknowledge me and validate my experiences in a safe and healthy manner, layers of that shame that I was carrying for all those years actually started to shed. And actually, I became very much empowered, knowing that, first of all, I'm not the only one that has experienced trauma. I'm not the only one that had grew up in an alcoholic home and experienced violence and abuse in all forms. There were so many others out there that actually never had language to name their experiences. So when I came and I started sharing openly and vulnerably with them, I actually had people that would thank me and say, thank you so much for actually putting words and names to what I've experienced. And it was so incredible. It was almost surreal. So what I realized was that speaking my truth actually catapulted my healing journey, because not only was I no longer carrying that heavy burden of shame and secrecy, that the secrets that I was keeping, I was now shedding them and replacing them with empowerment and truth and who I was actually becoming and making a difference in certain people's lives. Sharing my story has helped not only myself feel seen, valued, heard, and understood, but it's actually helped others as well along the journey. And the ripple effects, there's just something so surreal about getting a text message from somebody or a DM in my social media who's heard my story and sharing with me proudly that they have reached 3 months sobriety, thanks to me sharing my story so openly. I can't count the amount of times that I've had people come to me after I've spoken, after I've shared on a podcast, after I've been on a stage or I've written about my journey, the amount of people that have come to me and said their Me Too stories, like seeing a little piece of themselves in me. Because the thing about trauma, the thing about especially childhood trauma and complex trauma is that it's just not talked about enough. right? And so we grow up thinking, I know for myself, I grew up thinking I was the only one that had experienced these things. I thought that there was no one out there that understood what I had gone through. And because of that, I felt alone and so isolated. And so when I started to speak up on these things and people started to relate to what I was experiencing, we can all grow and heal together, and we can release the bondage of shame and the pain that we had been carrying all those years. When I think about 10 years ago and that decision that I made to give up alcohol, first of all, I can't even believe that I'm standing here 10 years, because I remember thinking when I entered into 12-step programs, for example, and people would take their chips 30 days, a year, I was so flabbergasted. I was like 30 days without drinking, because for me, alcohol was my crutch. It was my companion for a very long time. It's what I needed to get through life. And when I saw examples of people that were living, and not only just living, but they were actually thriving in their lives, sober and happy, I was so inspired. And I could only one day dream to make it 60 days, 90 days, a year, 2 years. And here I am 10 years. Thank you. You know, the journey has been the greatest gift in my life. Not only have I become and am becoming the woman that I could have only dreamed to be one day. I'm a mother of 4 beautiful children. I'm the cycle breaker in my family, a long lineage that runs on both lines, both paternal and maternal, of poverty, of war, of violence, of abuse, of addiction. And I said, it ends with me, it stops with me. And I'm proud to say that my children have never seen me take a drink. They have never seen me woken up in the middle of the night to glass breaking, to arguments, to door slamming, to the violence that I experienced growing up. And I'm so proud of that. It hasn't been easy, because I'm paving a new path in my family lineage that hasn't been paved before. And sometimes it feels like I'm walking through a fire as I'm trailblazing. Your truth is so powerful, and our boundaries are there to protect us. They're sacred, and it's worth every single step that we take in this difficult journey. Now I get the honor and the opportunity to be able to help guide other women, other mothers, through their own healing and recovery journeys, taking them by the hand and saying, come with me, there's a better way. Let's heal and grow together. And I have that beautiful opportunity to be able to coach and mentor women through what I so desperately needed in the past. I've become the role model that I once only dreamed of being. I want to leave you with this thought that the light that you find in sobriety is brighter than anything that you could ever chase in the dark. We belong in the sunshine. We belong in the light. And I'm here to stand as proof that we do recover, that we do heal, and that I believe in you, and that you're so worthy. Thank you.